The Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport is tightening up regulations in the e-hailing sector, and it's encouraging all app providers operating in the province to officially register their digital platforms with the National Department of Transport. Now, it follows the implementation of the amended National Land Transport Act in September. It formally recognizes e-hailing as part of South Africa's public transport system. So let's talk about the registration process, some of the commitments that have to be made, as well as enforcement, with the National Department of Transport spokesperson, Colin Msibi. Colin, good morning. Thanks for your time. I know it's a busy time for you because you're also involved in all of the preparations ahead of the festive season, I guess, and the rush we'll see on the roads. But let's talk about the e-hailing app that all of their providers now have to register in terms of this new amended legislation. What does it entail exactly? What does the registration itself entail? And I assume you're talking about the big providers, you're talking about your Ubers and your Bolts?
Not necessarily. Even yourself, if you've got an app, as an individual, you can actually go and register. So what it basically means is that you've got to have a registered app for you to be able to have an operating license with the what you call the provincial regulatory entity. So without that specific app, you can't get an operating license. So what we are saying, we've been working on the standard operating procedures in terms of what should be done by the regulator, but also in terms of the applicants, what is expected of them. So we've completed that. We've put that on our website. They can go there and be able to access it, the application forms and so forth. So what we are saying, because currently we don't have anyone who's registered, and hence we are saying they must come forward and be able to register with the national regulator. As
of now, they're all operating illegally in terms of this new amendment?
No. They're not operating illegally. Okay. They've got 180 days, especially the operators, to able to convert from what they have, which was charter permits and meter takes operating licenses, into e-hailing operating licenses. They've got 180 days since the 12th of September.
Right. And when does that expire, Colin?
It's basically 6 months. It gives you 6 months, I think around March.
Okay.
So you've got, so you can't get your operating license if you don't have, if you're not registered with a specific app company. But if the app company is not registered with us, basically you can't get an operating license. And hence we are saying it's important for those companies that are owning those platforms to be able to register with the National Public Transport Regulator.
Right, and as you're saying, so all of the players, anyone who is labelled an e-hailing app or service provider has to register.
It has, so they have to register.
Including the small players, includes
yes.
Bolts and Uber as well.
Yes.
So how will you verify the compliance? Because, and we've seen resistance. I mean, Bolt's been in South Africa for 9 years, I think. Uber's been in South Africa for 12 years. I think the time frames are. So they've been operating, I guess...
Around about 2013.
Yeah, so it's about 12 and 9 years, respectively, Uber and Bolt. So they, and we saw in the beginnings, remember covering these stories earlier on, the resistance to register in the, the country of operation. How does this change the way that they operate in South Africa? And what are some of the requirements in order to show their compliance that they need to provide?
Well, first of all, the issue of the app being registered, it is quite important. We're working with ICASA. You've got the certain checklist of things that you need to fulfill. For instance, in terms of the company papers, or if you're an individual, you must have your IDs and you must have tax clearance, all those things. But most importantly, you must have the certificate which shows that your app has been tried and tested by ICASA, because we don't have those expertise as a Department of Transport. So we've asked ICASA to be able to assist us. So when you apply without that certificate, we are not able to look at your application. So you've got to have it. But more so, your applications, once it is lodged with the regulator, you've got to come and demonstrate your app as to how it works. Within the app, you should be able to show us how it functions. For instance, as a requester for the service, does it capture my details? Does it capture the destination where I'm going? Secondly, in terms of the vehicle details, does it have the details of the vehicle? Does it have the details of the driver? Does it have the issues of safety, the safety functions, for instance, the panic buttons and all those things? So you should be able to demonstrate to the committee that is looking at your application to say all those things are there. But most importantly, as I said, this issue of the certificate from ICASA, it is very, very important. Without it, we are as good as not having applied. So it is important that they must go to ICASA to be able to deal with the issue of the app itself.
And if they do not register and also not found compliant, well, that's a secondary step, I suppose, they will not be allowed to operate.
Yes, it's simple as that, yeah.
Have you heard, I mean, let's talk about the big players, right? Let's talk about the Uber and Bolt. Have you heard anything from them with regard to this proposal? Well, it's not a proposal anymore. As you say, the amendments have been made. This is now, the legal time frame in which they need to show their compliance and register.
Well, that's why we're making this call, because they haven't come forward to say that they are applying to register. So we obviously think that the issue of the standard operating procedures probably will then assist them. So on our website, they should look at it, and we think that it's going to assist them to come forward. And of course, the issue of the registration is not limited to the 6 months. You can register even beyond the 6 months. But the reality is that if you want to operate, you still cannot if the platform is not registered. So the sooner, the better, basically.
Well, speaking of sooner, the better, Colin, I mean, so these operators have been in South Africa for so long. Why, and I guess the obvious question is, why has it taken so long to get to this point?
Well, I suppose it's the issue of change. Sometimes people are sort of resisting to change. So I think also...
from a legislative perspective, right? I mean, the one thing is population's one other thing. Yeah. But government, why did it take government so long to get to this point?
Well, the issue is that, I mean, when we started with in 2013, as I say, we've had to go through the whole process of amendment of the legislation, consultation and so forth. It took long. We've had to go to Parliament.
12 years?
Obviously, it's quite an unreasonable period. But at some point, we were sent packing by the president to say this thing, the separation of powers are not clear. It takes away some of the powers of the provinces, for instance. So we've had to go back. So there's been a to and fro with Parliament, but also with stakeholders. Because what we've learned from some of these amendments to the legislation, you'd find that when you think you are done, and then somebody then comes and say, we were not consulted. ETOL's best example. So we've had to deal with those issues when we're dealing with the NLTA. Yeah. But what is important right now for us is that we've done it. The 12th of September, we've been able to say, here are the regulations, here's the NLTA. The NLTA was even passed into law, I think it was last year, 2024 sometime. So I think it was June somewhere. So that was done in June.
Yeah.
So now I think ours is to look forward and say, how do we then proceed with this issue?
All right, and be that as it may, I mean, and we'll get to the enforcement part in just a moment. Yeah. This delay in actually getting this done and getting to this point has resulted in a number of bad things in the space. So you see, with the lack of accountability through the lack of legislative enforcement, bad service. Some of the top complaints: cancelled trips, overcharging, unauthorized deductions, dodgy cars. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the state of some of these vehicles. A lot of people, and I've had to use them recently traveling to Madlanga and back. Driver, not vetting the drivers, the sharing of permits. So you're not even sure that the driver that you're being assigned is the driver that is actually going to fetch you. And that's a huge security issue. We've had documented attacks and so on. It means, would you concede, that in the absence of acting swiftly as you ought to have, these service providers have just run roughshod over South Africans or any riders in South Africa?
Certainly, we are the first to admit that the process took longer than we expected. We'd have loved to move a bit faster.
No, but that it led to risk to consumers.
Certainly. I mean, we've seen quite a lot of things happening and drivers being attacked allegedly by the taxi industry, the minibus taxi industry. So it has led to quite a few things that have happened. But the reality is that we've done something about it. And I think we've got to accept that government has acted. And now the ball is in the court of the platform operators, as well as the e-hailing operators themselves, to be able to make sure that they allow themselves to be regulated. But also, we've had to ensure that the e-hailing service is not a stepchild, because it's been treated by other public transport mode as though that they don't exist. So
Right.
this particular legislation, we've been able to say, no, these are your counterparts. You should work together. And I was quite encouraged by Santaco saying that they formed a group where they are able to discuss, even with the e-hailing operators, to be able to say, how can we work together?
Well, let's see that play out on the
Yes.
streets, because
Yes.
that's where
Yes.
people are being shot, killed, or their vehicles are being damaged.
Yes.
Two quick things I want to cover with you before we have to wrap. The one is, so you're saying ostensibly in 6 months' time, if your big players, and let's just again go to the big players, all of them, right, have to register. 6 months is when that deadline is. If your Uber and Bolt don't, for some reason, don't want to comply, it could be the end of them operating in South Africa, because you would take... You would not allow, they would be operating illegally, correct?
Yes.
And the second is, Colin, on the enforcement of the SOPs, like the panic buttons and the background checks and so on. How are you going to make sure you do that? And you know, is it going to be reliant on riders to say, hey, I rode in this car, there wasn't a panic button, or this happened?
Yes, they can obviously report.
Yeah.
But the issue of enforcement, law enforcement officers, when they stop an e-hailing operator or driver, they should be able to check some of those compliant issues. So there is enforcement part of it.
Are you going to be stopping them? I mean,
like any other
Right.
public transport operator, we've got to stop. And when we stop you, we are able to check whether you are properly registered, do you have an operating license. So it's going to happen. And in this case, whether you've got the panic button in your car, because the only way to find out is for law enforcement to be able to check if those things are there.
Right.
So that's basically how we're going to deal with it. But in terms of whether to stop them from operating in the country, no. As soon as you are registered, I mean, you go and get an operating license, you will continue to operate, but you can't do it. In fact, if you operate and you are using a particular app, and yet you don't have an operating license, the app company is going to be punished.
how?
There's fines, 100,000 rand, that you've got to have to pay. But you, as an operator, we impound your vehicle because you don't have an operating license. So there's repercussions for such. You can't operate illegally.
And we'll try and get reaction from some of these players. We know Uber's been reticent historically to talk publicly, but let's get their reactions as well. Colin Msibi, thank you very much. Good luck.